Okay, I see lots of people coming in. So welcome to the Clinical Trials Readiness Workshop. The session, as I mentioned, is for both DM1 and DM2 tracks. It's intended for individuals and families living with both DM1 and DM2. The session is being recorded and it will be available for viewing after the conference at the MDF Digital Academy. So you'll be able to access this from myotonic.org/digital-academy. It will probably take us a week, maybe even 2 weeks to get all of the sessions from the conference onto the Digital Academy, so bear with us. I'm Tanya Stevenson, CEO at MDF, and I'm delighted to have the privilege to introduce our speakers today. And just as a reminder, you are welcome to type your questions in for the speakers, either into the chat function on Zoom or into the chat on the session page itself. We should be able to access all the questions no matter where you send them. And there will be a Q&A at the end of the session. So just know that if you ask your questions in advance, they will happen. They will be answered. Just give us till the end of the session. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so I get to introduce all of these fabulous speakers. Just give me one moment. Here we are. First off is Dr. Nicholas Johnson, who treats adults and children with both common and rare neuromuscular conditions. But his work doesn't end in the clinic. He dedicates significant time each week to laboratory research and is part of a team at Virginia Commonwealth University Health, working to advance the treatment of genetic muscle disorders with a special emphasis on muscular dystrophies. Dr. Johnson is board certified in neurology, neuromuscular medicine, and neuromuscular pathology by the American Academy of Neurology and serves on its government relations committee. Among many other myotonic dystrophy related projects and research, Dr. Johnson was the PI of the recent DM prevalence study and is currently the co-PI of the NDM1 study. It's a non-interventional natural history study designed and run by the Myotonic Dystrophy Clinical Research Network, which is a network of medical centers across the globe. There are 17 sites now that aim to support future clinical trials of potential therapies for DM1 through the generation of evidence around endpoint measures and testing methods. Also on the esteemed panel today is Alyssa Peters. She joined Avidity Biosciences in June of 2020 and serves as the Director of Patient Advocacy and Corporate Affairs. Alyssa has focused her career on supporting the development and commercialization of RNA-targeted therapeutics for rare diseases with high unmet needs. Prior to joining Avidity, Alyssa served as Associate Director of Global Marketing, helping bring Tegsedi to patients living with TTR amyloidosis with polyneuropathy, a rare neuromuscular disease which ignited her passion to focus in this therapeutic area. At Avidity, Alyssa actively partners with patient and advocacy communities to ensure that perspectives are central across all initiatives at the organization. Alyssa is passionate about seeing people's lives changed through the delivery of new therapeutics. Next up, we have Jodie Howell. Jodie is the Clinical Research Coordinator at Virginia Commonwealth University. She has 13 years of clinical research experience and has spent 2 years focusing specifically on neuromuscular disease, helping implement studies and trials for both DM1 and FSHD. For the last 2 years, she's focused on the Myotonic Dystrophy Translational Research Program at VCU. Jodie serves as a Virginia Medical Reserve Corps volunteer in the Tri-City area to support public health emergencies, and she co-chairs the Virginia chapter for FSHD Society in Richmond. She earned her associate's degree at John Tyler Community College and her LPN at ECPI University. And last but certainly not least is Miss Christy Newman. She is a stay-at-home mom of 4 children with DM1 who are now 16, 19, 22, and 23 years old. After years of trying to figure out what was wrong with her children, her husband and her 4 kids were diagnosed with DM1 in 2017. She's taken her family to participate in 3 different research studies, and she's preparing for her children to take part in current and upcoming clinical drug trials. Throughout her life, she keeps gaining more medical knowledge through education and life experiences, and feels a strong sense of duty to do all we can to find treatments and solutions, as well as create a loving, supportive environment for all those with disabilities. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicholas Johnson. Take it away.
Thanks, Tanya, for the kind introductions. And thank you all for joining us for our clinical trial readiness workshop. We're going to go through the presentations first, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. So I'm excited to be able to talk about how to prepare for these upcoming clinical trials. So my disclosures. So participating in research 101. So, you know, you found out you have myotonic dystrophy, or you found out your family or loved ones have myotonic dystrophy. How do you find out how to engage in clinical research? Well, one of the first and key points here is that you can look for studies on clinicaltrials.gov. This includes information about the age of eligibility, the subtypes that might be included. So is it DM1, is it DM2, is it both DM, is it adults or children, and then the functional status required. So these are, within myotonic dystrophy, these are probably the 3 most important elements when thinking about the clinical trial. So do you have to be able to walk to participate in the study? Do you have to, can you use assistive devices, et cetera? And those studies do include contact information. And so if I leave you with anything, no matter where you are in the world, you can look on clinicaltrials.gov, and this is probably your best and most accurate way to keep up to date with new and upcoming studies that you might be eligible to participate in. And if you're not sure about the study or the risks, you're just not sure, or if you're even qualified, don't hesitate to ask. The contact person on that is there for you. They're designed to answer your questions and help you out. So one of the probably most exciting things, I'm sure that you've heard about it over the last, I guess, 24 hours or so here at the MDF meeting, is the amount of progress that's been made in designing new therapies across myotonic dystrophy. And so that's great. I'm excited. I'm excited to move these trials forward. It's worth noting that there are some challenges in clinical trial design in myotonic dystrophy, both type 1 and type 2. It's a very heterogeneous disease. If we were all in person, you looked around, you see that there's a lot of differences in how the disease affects people. It is very slowly progressive, which can be good, but also the ability to detect a change in a functional outcome measure during a clinical trial can be challenging. And one of the key points, and one of the things that you'll see as trials move forward, is that we're looking at using prior performance on outcome measures to predict future performance. So if you look at the graph over here, this is a clinical outcome measure, like how fast you can walk. And you can see that, the high measure that changes too quickly and wouldn't be very helpful. And the low measure changes not quickly enough and wouldn't be helpful. And so you're really trying to find that sweet spot in the middle where you're able to detect change over a short enough period of time. And if this is my pitch to you, is that natural histories are incredibly important. They provide tools for clinical trials. And so these tools are things like outcome measures that we use to tell if myotonic dystrophy change between 2 points in time. They do often include biomarkers, which are something that you may measure in blood or muscle, or something an evaluator assesses like strength or the ability to do tasks, or even those questionnaires that we make you fill out about how myotonic dystrophy affects your life. And I spent a lot of time, along with the rest of the investigators in the DMCRN, thinking about outcome measures that are pertinent to myotonic dystrophy. They're reliable, so they can measure the same thing one day and the next. They're sensitive to disease progression. They're inexpensive, and you can do it at many sites. And so we're working very hard on the right mix of outcome measures for myotonic dystrophy. And we do this throughout the Myotonic Dystrophy Research Network, which you can see here. These sites are sites that that can be helpful in terms of often will likely be upcoming clinical trial sites. And again, we do have an ongoing study right now. This is DM1, which is a 700 patient, a 2-year study at 16 centers, soon to be 17. And you can see it's supported by a wide mix of people. And the visits are designed to take 4 to 6 hours. And so, the goal is to focus on key clinical outcome measures to refine trial design. And this is now the end of my pitch, but if you spend the next hour thinking, gosh, I really want to get involved in clinical research, my email's right here. Our clinical operations manager is Jessica St. Romain. Her email's right there. If you email one of us and ask, we'll get you to the closest open site in one of these adult or pediatric natural history studies. So those natural history studies are important. They lay the foundation for preparing for drug approval, and that can take some time. These are some facts here. So on average, it takes 12 years for a drug to be approved, and out of 5,000 drugs, only 5 make it to actual market. So that gives you a sense of the kind of daunting number of, out of 5,000 drugs make it to clinical trials, and only one of those 5 drugs make it to market. So again, gives you a sense of the daunting odds about what it takes to get a drug to market. And so even if you're thinking about those trials or those drugs that are coming into clinical trials, it's pretty impressive that they've come that far to begin with. And the graph on the left-hand side shows you, the basic steps for those clinical studies. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And we'll talk in a second about how in myotonic dystrophy, because it's a rare disease, you'll often see that the trials are a little bit faster, which is, I think, a good thing. Which is that, so as I said, drug approval may be different for rare diseases like myotonic dystrophy. So myotonic dystrophy is covered under the Orphan Drug Act. And so you have, or pharmaceutical companies have several forms of regulatory relief in terms of both breakthrough designation and priority review, and some additional contact with the Food and Drug Administration. And all of that puts together, and we can certainly belabor this in the question and answer period, is that it's probably a little bit faster than standard drug development. So again, that's good news for myotonic dystrophy, but I think I need to emphasize that, it is still a pretty significant lift to get a drug all the way through into clinical trials, and then from clinical trials into the market. So who participates in which study? You'll hear people talk about, this is a phase 1, this is a phase 2 or phase 3 study. So you can see here that there's a lot of work that goes into preclinical studies, and often several years there, both trying to find an effective therapy and then testing it in several different animal species to make sure it's safe. Once it gets into clinical trials, phase 1 is focused specifically on safety. So this often includes either healthy volunteers or mildly affected individuals. And phase 2 focuses on safety and dosing, and typically includes mild or moderately affected individuals. And you can see on the graph, phase 1 trials can be pretty small. Phase 2 is usually still pretty small, but a little bit bigger. And then phase 3 is about efficacy. So does the drug actually work? Does it change your quality of life if you have myotonic dystrophy? And you can see again that those trials are a little bit larger in terms of the number of patients, although it may be the same population. So what's this going to look like in myotonic dystrophy? Well, bottom line is that it really is going to depend quite a bit on a number of key points here. number one, what's the type of therapy? Is it gene-based? Is it a viral therapy that may be more designed for children, for example? Is it a small molecule, like a pill that you would take every day? Or is it something in between, like these antisense oligonucleotide or siRNA therapies, which are going to be an IV infusion and could be focusing on muscle endpoints, for example? It depends on the safety profile. So the safer the drug looks in preclinical studies, often the quicker it's able to move through clinical trials. It depends on the primary endpoint. So as I said, those are still a little bit unclear. We're getting to a point where we have a pretty good sense, but we're not quite there yet. And that's where studies like DM1 and Treat CDM often can help with that. It depends on the effect size. So does this drug really work? Does it, if you're playing baseball, does it knock it out of the park? Or does this drug help, but maybe not as much? And so if a drug helps a little, which is great, it may need to be studied more and more people to be able to show in a convincing way that it's actually effective. And then there's the X factor, which is the program design. So different pharmaceutical companies have different approaches and how they want to look at those first four factors and what they think is the best way to get to market. And so that's kind of the X factor. It's going to change. And I actually think these are likely to be a highly dynamic process. It's very likely that these original clinical trials that we see in myotonic dystrophy type 1 are not going to be the same ones that we would see in 5, 7, or even 10 years, because every time we do a clinical trial, we learn a lot about how best to do that trial and to make sure that that we keep patients safe and that we understand truly whether or not the drug is effective. One question I often get is, can you get this therapy outside of a clinical trial? And the short answer right now in September 2021 is probably not. So early clinical trial needs to focus on safety. That's an important thing. You want them to focus on safety. I know it's exciting, and I definitely know that people are anxious to get to these new and exciting treatments, but those early clinical trials need to focus on safety. That's the cornerstone. And then later on, again, depending on the company, there may be more open access studies parallel, but these, again, these trials are short in myotonic dystrophy. So it's that's going to be a depends answer, but as it stands right now, that there's not a lot of availability. So what can you do now? You can enroll in those natural history studies to help us design better clinical trials. You can participate in registries like the Myotonic Dystrophy Foundation registry or the registry at the University of Rochester, and stay informed on development programs. Many are moving forward. I know that you heard great information about that over the last 24 hours. And then just a reminder that even though we're spending a lot of time thinking about clinical trials, this is just the beginning. So trial populations almost universally are more narrow than general population. So not everybody that has myotonic dystrophy is going to be fully represented in those clinical trials. And that will create challenges, or may create challenges, even once the drug is approved, because we need to work with insurers to get the drugs paid for and get them to you in clinic. And of course, there's enough things out there that it's certainly possible to consider combination therapies in the future. And that is all I have. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pass this over to Alyssa Peters at Avidity. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. It's a pleasure to be here. Alyssa Peters, I am the head of patient advocacy at Avidity Biosciences. Avidity is a biotech company based in La Jolla, California, and we're in the process of initiating our first clinical trial for people living with myotonic dystrophy type 1. I want to thank Dr. Nick Johnson, as well as the MDF, for inviting me to participate in this really important panel on clinical trial readiness. During my talk, I hope to represent the drug developer's perspective on this topic. I will be making forward-looking statements during my presentation today. Clinical trials are an essential part of the process of how a drug becomes a drug. Today, I hope to answer for you some key questions about the drug development process, and more specifically, clinical trials, including how a disease is considered for drug development, what partners contribute to the drug development process, where clinical trials fit in this process and how they're designed, and importantly, what are our responsibilities as drug developers to clinical trial participants. So let's start at the beginning. As you've heard during this conference, there's a lot that happens at a company before a clinical trial can be initiated. Creating a new drug can be a long and rigorous process that takes years, sometimes decades, from advancing a promising idea in the lab through clinical development and finally to the point where it's approved by regulators. At Avidity, our launching point for this journey is with a technology that holds the promise of making a meaningful impact on people's lives. Avidity was founded several years ago with the goal of creating a new and innovative technology that can help overcome the limitations of other drug types. In doing so, Avidity set out on a mission to improve people's lives by applying this technology to drug development. There are many different factors that drug developers might consider when deciding what diseases to pursue for drug development. These can include patient unmet need, which means identifying a disease where there is high medical burden and quality of life burden with limited or no effective treatment options available to the people that need them. Additionally, like Avidity, if we're focused on a specific technology, it's important to identify diseases where that technology can be applied to make a meaningful difference. For myotonic dystrophy type 1, Avidity's AOC technology might be a great fit because it can target the genetic cause of the disease in muscle and heart cells where that disease process is occurring. Additionally, drug developers also consider opportunities to leverage expertise and efficiencies to be able to accelerate this drug development process. That's why you often see a company focused on one or two therapeutic areas or a certain application of a technology so that they can continue to leverage or expand their expertise, partnerships, and processes in order to bring drugs to patients sooner. Once a disease like myotonic dystrophy is considered for drug development, it's important to confirm our assumptions. Drug developers rely on research and partnerships to validate these. And to do so, we hope to understand the current opportunities and challenges in the patient journey to a diagnosis, as well as disease management, validate the patient unmet needs, explore current therapeutic landscape and burden, and identify patient goals for treatment. It's in gaining a deeper understanding of these elements that drug developers can better inform their approach to research and development to bring forth treatments that can best meet the lifestyle and medical needs of the people who need them. It's important to recognize that drug developers cannot effectively do this work on their own. Yesterday, Dr. Jeffrey Statland talked a lot about collaboration in the drug development process, and it's only through these active and ongoing partnerships with patient advocacy organizations, healthcare providers, health authorities like the FDA, and coverage providers or insurance providers is true patient-centric drug development achieved. It's through these collaborations that we can ensure that the patient perspective is prioritized in our decisions to help advance care. In fact, many drug developers often have dedicated patient advocacy functions within their corporate structure. These functions help foster relationships with patients, caregivers, and the advocacy groups that support them. It's through these interactions that we can ensure that the voice of the patient is well understood across every function within a drug developer's organization. At Avidity, I serve in a strategic patient advocacy role, and I've had the pleasure of partnering very closely with Tanya and the MDF, as well as many of you in the DM community. Avidity's patient advocacy goals are to serve as the bridge to communicate, educate, and collaborate with the DM community. As you heard from Dr. Johnson, there's a lot of work and research that goes into advancing a drug to the point of initiating clinical trials. And this begins with basic research, which is really to gain a comprehensive understanding of the disease and how it interacts with the body. Based on this research, drug candidates can be formulated in the lab to interact with a certain process of that disease or its symptoms. Safety and efficacy testing is conducted in computerized models, cells, and animals in the process of preclinical research. Additionally, extensive toxicology testing is done for risk assessment and management before initiating clinical trials. Avidity was founded 9 years ago in 2012, and now in 2021, we are initiating our first clinical trial. Importantly, we spent the last few years working on several critical initiatives, including developing our innovative AOC platform, determining the most promising therapeutic areas to address, which for Avidity is for severe and rare muscle diseases like myotonic dystrophy type 1, discovering and optimizing drug candidates like AOC 1001, and assessing their safety and activity in lab and animal studies and preclinical research. We just recently received clearance from the FDA to initiate our first trial, which is called the MARINA trial, a phase 1/2 clinical trial evaluating the safety and tolerability of AOC 1001 in adults with myotonic dystrophy type 1. Clinical trials are carefully designed in order to prioritize patient safety, as well as to generate the best evidence to show whether a drug has a meaningful impact on people's lives. The protocol is a comprehensive written description of what happens in a trial. The protocol will outline the trial goals and objectives, what endpoints will be evaluated throughout the trial, as well as the dosing and visit schedule. The protocol also defines who is eligible to participate in the trial. Eligibility criteria is carefully selected in order to determine participant characteristics that will help accomplish the trial's purpose, as well as ensure participant safety. Additionally, drug developers must also select clinical trial sites. These can be selected based on key factors, including clinic expertise and patient access. For example, in the MARINA trial, we're working to select sites that are part of the DMCRN because of their great experience and expertise in working with the DM1 community. We're also working to select sites in the DMCRN across the US in order to broaden patient access, as well as minimize any travel burden to participate in those trials. Importantly, the underpinning of each of these elements in a clinical trial is the need to prioritize the patient perspective. Oftentimes, the best way to do this is to include patients, caregivers, and advocates directly in these planning discussions. At Avidity, we've held a number of advisory boards and focus groups with DM expert physicians and patients from the DM community with the goal of enhancing our clinical trial design. Additionally, we are also partnering with the DM community to develop a new research tool called the Patient-Reported Outcome Assessment, which will help us measure what's meaningful to patients throughout our clinical trials. Clinical trials follow strict scientific standards and guidelines in order to protect participant safety, as well as generate accurate and reliable results. And in order to achieve this, we all play important roles in the clinical trial process. As drug developers, we're responsible for developing and manufacturing the investigational drug, prioritize patient safety throughout the drug development process, design clinical trials, and then report back the results, and finally to sponsor drug applications with health authorities like the FDA. Investigators, who are the doctors and their teams that are at these clinical trial sites, are responsible for educating trial participants about the study, as well as enrolling them in the study, administering the investigational drug or the placebo per the study protocol, solving problems and answering questions that participants may have, and collecting and reporting safety and efficacy data. As a trial participant, it's important to ask questions about the investigational drug, the clinical trial, and your role in the clinical trial, as well as adhere to the protocol as discussed with your clinical trial team, and to report any side effects or changes in your health with your clinical team as well. And finally, health authorities, often called regulators like the FDA, are responsible to protect public health through the supervision of investigational drugs, which includes regulating drug testing, approval, labeling, and manufacturing. If you're interested in gaining more resources on clinical trials, the best place to start is by having a conversation with your doctor about what clinical trial options are available. Patient advocacy organizations like the MDF often have terrific resources on clinical trials and their current status. Drug developers' websites can also have up-to-date information on drug research and development, and you might even consider connecting directly with their patient advocacy team. At Avidity, you can connect with us by emailing us at patients@aviditybio.com. You heard from Dr. Johnson earlier that clinicaltrials.gov is a great database that can be searched on the web to find ongoing and recruiting clinical trials and information about them. And then finally, the FDA has a super helpful webpage called Clinical Trials, What Patients Need to Know. There are many different reasons that one might consider participating in a clinical trial, from the potential to improve your quality of life or slow disease progression, or even possibly finding a cure for yourself or a loved one. Some may even consider participating to help contribute to the advancement of care in a meaningful way for future generations. Regardless of your reason for participating, it's important for drug developers to make clear what is and isn't possible in a clinical trial. Patients and their families are truly the reason we're here. So if someone chooses to participate in a clinical trial with us, we respect them as a partner in this important work. I'd like to close with what is our responsibility as drug developers to clinical trial patients. The first is to make it meaningful, which means to ensure that we've done the research along the way to bring forth meaningful drugs that will have an impact on people's lives today or in the future. To make it understandable, to clearly communicate about clinical trials in plain language, and to take as much time as needed to answer questions. To make it accessible, which means to work with partners to minimize any barriers to participate in clinical trials, whether they be travel, financial, or logistical. And this starts with protocol development through enrollment and ensuring study diversity. And finally, to clearly communicate the purpose of the clinical trial, progress along the way, and the results after it's completed. I'm happy to answer questions you have about this topic at the end of the session. If you do have specific questions about the Marina trial and Avidity's work, I do recommend you take those to the Avidity exhibit, and my teammates would be happy to answer those for you. And with that, I will stop sharing and invite Jodie to talk about clinical trial readiness from her perspective as a clinic research coordinator.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jodie Howell. I'm a clinical research coordinator at VCU. I've been coordinating clinical research trials for over 10 years now. I currently coordinate the DM1 and the STOP DM2 studies at VCU. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what to expect when participating in a clinical trial. The topics I'm going to kind of cover today are what to consider, know your rights, informed consent, clinical trial team, day of visit, and helpful hints. What to consider, things to think about when you're participating in a clinical trial. Clinical trials are an important step in developing of new treatments, but participation involves some important considerations for the patient. What do you hope to gain for your participation in a clinical research trial? Most individuals want to take part in the clinical trial to contribute to the effort to fight for their diseases and conditions. Some of them are wanting to try out new therapies. Others know there's no benefit, but they still want to help with advancement of the therapy. Consider if this is the right trial for you. When considering doing a research trial, think about what the researchers are trying to discover with their trial. Consider the time and dedication it may require of you with visit attendance, the location of the clinical trial, if you have to have travel arrangements, and what is expected of you outside the clinical trial, such as taking a study medication, recording your study doses in a diary daily, things like telehealth visits that may be required of you in your home setting. Also, when you're thinking about participating in a clinical trial, think about if you're eligible. Be honest about factors impacting your own abilities, eligibility. You may be at risk if you fail to disclose important information to researchers. And potential risk and possible benefits. Every clinical trial has risks, but not all have benefits. Researchers should be able to tell you what they anticipate the risk and benefits to be, which leads me to my next slide. My next slide, the informed consent. The informed consent is probably be the first document you see in a clinical trial when you express interest. This is an important document. It's a roadmap for you. It's the document that provides adequate information to allow you, the subject, to make an informed decision about whether you want to participate or not. The informed consent is not a contract, and it doesn't waive any of your legal rights, but it does approach some elements of the study. So the informed consent, when you first start to read it, the very first page is going to tell you what the study is about. what their researchers are trying to prove. Then it's going to give you a layout of what's expected during this study. It's going to give you information about what we're going to do at a study visit, all the procedures or the assessments we will be doing during a study visit. It also is going to tell you about the study medication. If it is a drug study, it's going to describe what the study medication is. It's going to tell you the risk and benefits of taking that study medication. It is also going to give you information about how long you will be participating in a study. It also gives you information about privacy and HIPAA and how researchers keep your information protected, as well as giving you information of who you can contact in case you feel like you are not being treated adequately or fairly during a research trial. It also, at the very end of it, is going to ask you if you understand everything that was read over to you in this document. This is the time when you can make your informed decision whether you want to participate in or not. Before you ever sign that informed consent questions, you have the right to ask questions at any time during a research study. Questions should be answered to your satisfaction by the researchers or the researcher's representative. Participating in a research study is voluntary. Subjects or yourself, if you do participate, you have the right to withdraw at any time for any reason without any negative consequences to you. And confidentiality. Most research studies follow HIPAA and keep your information private. Once you sign the informed consent form, you become de-identified, you become a research number. Of course, that doesn't mean you're just a number to the research team or the site. It just means that the sponsor or the sponsor of the study does not know the individual. So I believe I like to give a quote occasionally, and my favorite one is from Dr. Fauci. I believe I have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on society. I totally believe that as researchers, it's our job to have a positive effect on the outcome of society. So I wanted today to talk about key members in the clinical research trial. It takes a whole team to run a study at one site. So the first person you're likely to meet in a clinical research trial is the clinical research coordinator. The coordinator manages the daily clinical trial activities. They often are the first person that you will meet, such as myself. I like to call this position the conductor. They conduct all aspects of the trial. They connect people and connect the subjects with the team. The next person will be the principal investigator, or also called the study doctor. His role is to oversee the trial. He's in charge of conducting the oversight at the clinical site. He reviews everything that we collect from EKGs, from lab results, MRI, DEXA scans, anything that is study related. The principal investigator will review before we submit that data. There's a ton of people behind the scenes, the support staff. We have people that do physical therapy, speech therapy, research assistants, lab techs, MRI techs, radiology techs. They help support us in making sure that all the assessments that the sponsor wants is collected and is done consistently. As was spoken about before, a sponsor is a company or a person or organization that oversees and pays for the clinical trial. They collect the data, they analyze it, and they'll be the ones that submit to the FDA. They're the ones that kind of set this, the framework of the study being conducted at the site. And another important key member that most people don't think about is your primary care physician. They're a valuable link between the study team and yourself, the subject. It is important that you let your study doctor know that you're participating in a clinical trial, and if it's a drug study trial, what the study drug is. That way they can coordinate with the primary principal investigator to coordinate your health. And last but not least, and certainly the most important, is the Institutional Review Board. This is a group that serves an important role in protecting the rights and welfare of human research subjects. Anything we present to you in a clinical trial has to be approved by them. They look out for your rights and your welfare and make sure that the clinical sites are doing everything in accordance with FDA regulations. So after all, meeting the team, you're going to think about what's your next thing, and that is usually the visit day, a day at a clinical visit. So usually you'll be in contact with me at the study coordinator, and we will set up your appointment. And usually I'll call 2 to 3 days before your visit and confirm your appointment and make sure everything's all right. Confirm the location, because sometimes where you see the primary care physician is not the same place where you will do the clinical research. They may be in different locations. So you want to make sure you know the location where you need to go and who you are seeing. Always bring your medical records. Bringing your medical records helps give a clear picture of your health. And it also helps with determining your eligibility into a study. And also bring your list of current medications. Always have your current medications with you at each and every visit, because things change and we can review them at each visit and make sure that everything that you are taking is okay and not prohibited in any clinical drug study trial. Also, bring a family member with you. It's always good to have a second pair of ears. Always at least bring one person with you to help you out during the visit. They can take notes, they can remember questions that you wanted to ask, they can be your moral support, and they can also help if you need assistance transferring from one location to another. Ask questions, make a list. I know when being in a study visit, things can be moving fast, and sometimes you don't get to ask all the questions that you want to. So make a list and ensure that you are able to get them asked and have them answered completely and to your satisfaction. Last but not least, some helpful tips for when you come to your study visits. Always wear comfortable, loose-fitting clothing, sneakers, tennis shoes. This way you have good mobility if you're asked to do some assessments. Bring your assist devices, bring your AFOs, walker, wheelchair, anything that you need to help with your mobility. Bring a snack and water. Sometimes visits run very long and longer than expected, and nobody wants a hangry patient. Study material. Always bring study material that is provided to you during the study, that being the study medication. If they give you study medication, bring it all back to your every visit. If they give you a study binder with important information, bring that back with you so it can be updated. If they give you an electronic device to record your diary dosing in, bring that back so it can be reviewed and analyzed. Always bring a little notebook or a calendar with you. Having a calendar available will help you project your visits out and help you and the coordinator coordinate your visits. And that way you have a list of upcoming visits. And just mute your phone. It helps to eliminate background noise, and conversation will not be interrupted. Thank you. And I hope to answer some questions for you this afternoon, and also go to the VCU exhibit booth if you have any other questions about the studies we're doing at VCU. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it off to Christy now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodie. So I was just asked to share kind of our story with my family and experience. So I'm going to give some background, and it's mostly about my kids. My husband's minimally affected. His medicine for his tiredness works great. So thankfully, I'm not having to take care of him as much as the kids. Okay.
So this picture's from 2010, but back in 2001, we were told that one of my husband's siblings had tested positive for DM1, so it could possibly affect our family. We were not told anything else about it, and we didn't understand what it was. We didn't even know that DM1 was what some of my husband's cousins suffered from. The internet was just getting started, so I couldn't really research it easily. And when I heard the words muscular dystrophy, I just thought of like people who can't even walk, and that our family must not be affected.
Are you guys hearing that okay?
Yeah, it's working well.
Thank you.
The problems I had been dealing with my children from early on were things like digestive issues, extreme tiredness, low weight, trouble eating, respiratory concerns, autism, learning disabilities, attention deficit, auditory processing, hypothyroidism, a turned-in leg that required surgery, etc. I was always searching for answers, knowing something was wrong, but no one else seemed to believe me, or they said they would grow out of it. I was often treated as if my kids were choosing to be this way and I was letting them. As they got to be teens, I started noticing slurred speech and facial drooping, and the other issues were getting worse, not better. I found out about myotonic.org in December 2016 from a family member, and when I read everything on that website, I was surprised that everything I had been facing for years could be caused by DM1. I used the online tool to find a specialist near me and emailed Dr. Johnson, and he told us to come see him. In March 2017, we found out that my husband and all 4 children have DM1, which was just a week after my husband's cousin passed away from DM1 at age 40. I was glad to finally have answers and good support, but very sad that things were much worse than I realized. After further testing, we found out that the kids all had sleep apnea and one had an AV block. We also realized why my son had anesthesia complications with his surgery the year before. With the myotonic anesthesia guidelines, his next surgery went much better. My family has participated in a few research studies at the University of Utah. We lived near there, and so it was not hard to do. We were happy to help. And since they were diagnosed there, they already had their records. We moved away a couple of years ago, but have flown back a few times for a study that one of my sons is in, and they did help with travel and lodging. They are very professional and kind, and I feel like I also learned a lot by taking my kids to participate.
And I graduated from BYU, but I have no hate for University of Utah.
Now that we are living in the East Coast, we are taking part in studies and trials through BCU in Richmond, where Dr. Johnson happens to be working these days. We love seeing good doctors and nurses who are a great support, and it's exciting to look forward to drug trials. Any possible help is welcome. It's worth the drive to me, and they do help cover travel expenses. You can find available and upcoming studies and trials on clinicaltrials.gov and myotonic.org. I know my family doesn't read everything I do, so I just give them a brief explanation that they can understand and the pros and cons and ask them to participate, and they choose if they want to or not. They want a treatment or cure and are willing to do their part to help make it happen. As you can see, they just make themselves comfortable and take a nap or play on their phone when waiting for the next test. They are really good sports. All but one have even volunteered for muscle biopsies. They are strong in their own way. Just like all the doctors we see, studies and trials will need some medical records. I find I can keep track better with digital records. If they give me a paper, I take a picture of it or scan it in. I ask for results to be emailed to me or posted on my chart where I can download it. Some things get taken off my chart with time, but you can contact them and ask that they put it back on so that you can download it. When I send emails with records, it gets saved, so I can just search my emails for a lot of records. I also keep notes on my phone of which symptoms which family member has, and I add to it as things come up or get worse. I also put notes on my phone of questions I want to remember to ask the doctor. You will need your genetic test results for DM1 to participate in research and trials. I have found that some people are afraid of testing. They seem to feel that bad things will happen if someone finds out they tested positive for something. That has not been our experience. In both education and medical testing, it has only opened doors for us to get the support they need. There are laws against genetic testing discrimination. I really encourage everyone with family history to get tested. I wish we had sooner. My family has had a lot of testing done, such as sleep studies, MRI, CT, QEEG, 2D echo, ECG, Holter monitor, muscle biopsy, EMG, cognitive tests, physical strength tests, speech and language tests, blood work, etc. I was surprised and had a good laugh when I asked one of my sons which was his least favorite. It wasn't one that was painful. He said it was the strength test because they make him feel weak. I think the best thing I can do for my kids is to learn and understand what's going on with them and what I can possibly do to help them. I may have some medical knowledge from my education and life experiences helping my parents with medical care, but mostly I just read everything I can find about their disease and research. I watch all of the awesome webinars Myotonic.org presents and annual conferences. I read medical journals, and even though I don't understand all of the vocabulary, I get the gist of it. I email drug developers and doctors with questions and reach out to others on the Myotonic Facebook groups. I have been able to chat on there with others who have participated in past drug trials. Everyone is very helpful. It's a caring community. As caregivers, we can see how hard it is to live with this disease. Our family members need someone to fight for them when they are not able to fight for themselves, to make sure they get the best treatment available. My kids struggle with good communication, so it is important that I really understand them and represent their needs well with doctors and teachers. I feel like an interpreter sometimes, even though we all speak English. The kids need to understand what's going on, and the doctors need to understand how the kids feel about the treatment, study, trial, etc. I am just getting started with clinical trials for my family. Once you find a trial you would like to participate in, you would need to contact a coordinator at the site nearest you, and they will ask questions to see if you qualify and then move forward with a screening appointment before you actually start taking the drug. My mom took part in a clinical trial at Cleveland Clinic when she had a rare cancer. They were very careful with her and took good care of her. They helped her arrange angel flights because she was on oxygen and could not fly commercial. They also provided housing. The medical research community is held to a very high standard, medically, legally, and ethically. I have had a lot of interaction with several big research hospitals across the country and have been impressed by all of them. I am thankful for this brilliant community, and we feel excited to help. Rare diseases won't cure themselves, and we want a cure.
And that is my presentation. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Christy. And with that, we will take questions and answers now. You all have been posting them in the chat function. And so I am going to work my way through some of these and ask my fellow panelists. So the first question is, are all clinical trials announced to everyone on the MDF registry, and could they be? So we didn't talk about the MDF registry, but if you do go there, you'll see that there are a number of listings of different studies that largely match what's on clinicaltrials.gov. One thing that's worth mentioning, and I'll ask Alyssa to comment as well, is that when we submit an IRB to get permission to do a clinical research trial, we have a set of language that we can use to recruit patients. And so whether or not you have whether or not you get a blast through the registry depends somewhat on how the company or the investigator decided to advertise or reach out for the study. Alyssa, are other thoughts from the industry side?
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Johnson. And just so everyone listening knows, we're partnering closely with the MDF to ensure that they have up-to-date information on the trials we're conducting, and I'm sure other drug developers are doing the same in this space as well.
Okay, and it looks like Tanya wants to say something about the registry. She should. Give it a
I
plug.
want to just jump in and follow Alyssa and say that we absolutely send things out to registry participants. So if you are enrolled in the Myotonic Dystrophy Family Registry, you should be receiving communication from MDF directly. And just a few weeks ago, we did send out information about the 3 clinical trials that have launched this year. So if you haven't received that and you're part of the registry, please by all means let us know so we can make sure that we've included you and we can double check our database. So, yes.
Tanya, would you not necessarily receive it if it didn't apply to you? For example, if they're DM1 or you had DM2, would you get the blast, or does it go to everybody?
So it will depend. In the case of the communication that we sent just a few weeks ago, it went to everyone because we included all 3 trials at once. And we also wanted to make sure that they had access to the Meet the Drug Developer videos so they could learn as much as possible about those trials at that point in time. We also want to make sure that people have a little bit of hope. I mean, there's so much excitement around these trials. And even if they are not right now available to everyone, and if they're not included in the inclusion criteria for the trials, that there might be coming up, right? There soon, hopefully, there will be many more trials. And so we want folks to just start to get familiar with that communication and learn a little bit more about the trials.
Great. Thanks, Tanya. The next question is, everything seems to be focused on DM1. How does this apply to DM2? How is any of this relevant to DM2? When will we have studies and trials? Which is a great question. So I think, first of all, the one thing I'll say about the talks is that these talks apply to all of DM. So the same steps in drug development, the same things you need to be ready for during clinical research study, and the excellent step that Christy Newman and her family have kept kind of staying informed and being ready. That applies to anyone with myotonic dystrophy, adult or child, DM1 or DM2. Unfortunately, most current therapeutic development is largely focused initially on DM1. I think that because we're a little bit further behind on the natural history studies, the ability to design new therapies for DM2 has lagged behind. And so, I think that's something that we will continue to watch for in the future. I did just do a quick look on clinicaltrials.gov while others were speaking, and there is the STOP DM2 study, which is at the University of Rochester and now at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is a natural history study. So I'm sorry for missing that one earlier. Anybody have any other comments about DM2? Okay, all right. Next question is, what is expected time for a drug to be available? And kind of along with that is maybe how a drug trial focused down on a subgroup such as DM1 or even smaller group than that. And maybe Alyssa, do you want to take this question first?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So in terms of the second part of that, it's important that inclusion criteria or the eligibility criteria are focused on enrolling participants with similar characteristics. That helps ensure that the results will be due to the investigational drug that's under study and not other factors, including medical differences among participants. In this way, it helps researchers achieve accurate and meaningful results. And in terms of timelines, I think we've covered today that it can take many years for a drug to reach the market. And as Dr. Johnson shared in rare diseases, these can often be expedited or accelerated. So I think as shared as well, the best likelihood of getting an access to an investigational drug is through these clinical trials that are starting to enroll.
Great. I think, the way drug trials, a lot of thought and care is put into this because it's important for everybody to recognize that even though I'm excited, all the panelists are excited, I know you are excited about these new potential therapies, they still remain an unknown entity. And our first obligation to you is to make sure they're safe. And so when we design studies, they're designed to minimize the risk as much as possible. And so it doesn't mean you just start by giving it to everybody. And so I think that's important to emphasize. All right, I understand University of Rochester is looking for congenital children for a drug trial. At the top of the talk, it was mentioned that healthy is criteria. How do you define this? Isn't severity of congenital by definition unhealthy? Does the definition change for each study? So couple of great questions in there. The first one is that I believe they're talking about the AMO Pharma clinical trial. If you look again, either on the MDF homepage or the AMO site or clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see there's University of Rochester, but also there's a number of other sites that are doing that study. And so you can certainly look there and reach out to the coordinator or contact information that's closest to you. The most studies may include controls, which are often healthy, or could be people who don't receive the drug and get placebo instead. So matched people with the same condition. But that really depends quite a bit, as does the definition of severity. So depending on, by and large, for the most part, early studies tend to focus on less affected individuals to assess that safety criteria. But that's not always true. And that's not true in that AMO clinical trial, because it's really targeted at congenital myotonic dystrophy, which is correct, the most severe form of myotonic dystrophy type 1. So the short answer is it depends. It depends on the study. How is it decided who each company wants to participate, and why don't some of the research coordinators call me back? All right, Jodie, how do you get your research coordinator to call you back?
How do you get your, you would definitely inundate them, give them emails, call their phones. If you don't hear back from them in 2 or 3 days time, call again, leave a message. Most of the time, study coordinators are in the clinic doing study visits during the day. So my rule of thumb is I try to answer you within 24 hours. Some days I can get a response back to patients that day. Sometimes it'll take me to the next morning. I say stay, and if you feel like you're not getting good results, look for the PI, the doctor who's in charge of the study at that site, and reach out to them as well. And then they will get their coordinator to contact you.
Maybe Alyssa, I'm going to fold that first part of the question with the next question as well. Is how is it decided who each company wants to participate, and what is the likelihood of being selected for a clinical trial if you apply, and how can you improve your chances to get into one?
Great, all really important questions. So how it's chosen who's able to participate is based on that eligibility criteria that we talked about. And there's a lot of care that goes into crafting the eligibility criteria, counsel with expert physicians, patients, as well as importantly for the MARINA trial, we're relying a lot on the DM1 natural history trial to understand how we can best characterize patients that will have similar characteristics for the study. And I think, the best way to be considered is to ensure that you're receiving care from some of these sites that are really active in clinical research. And so for myotonic dystrophy, that's the DMCRN, which you've heard a lot about. And Dr. Johnson shared the list of sites that are available globally. Did I miss any of the questions there, Dr. Johnson?
I think you got it. Maybe Christy, so you've been very successful at participating in research, so thank you. Any tips for people who really want to get involved from your side?
So I have found that sometimes the online information is out of date, like at clinicaltrials.gov. So I don't know if local sites are checking that to make sure it's staying up to date, because sometimes your research coordinator changes or, different things happen. So like Jodie saying, reaching out to the actual doctor, that's less likely to change as often as maybe some of that support staff. And yeah, call and email, just try to get through with somebody. And you can even reach out to the drug developer companies like Avidity and say, is this information I have correct? Because I'm having a hard time communicating. So there's several places you can reach out to.
Great. Okay, how do you choose how many participants are included in a study? That's a great question. So the core design of a study is the number of participants in a study at its core is typically designed using what's called a power calculation, which is where we try to assess how many people it would take to show a change between people who get the placebo and people who get the actual drug. So for example, if you say that the average rate of progression on your ability to walk 10 meters or 30 feet changes by about 10% a year, and that the drug that you're administering you think might improve that by 50 or 75% or even 20%. Those two factors go into a calculation and it spits out, it says, well, in order to show that difference, you need to have 30 people in the drug group and 30 people in the placebo group. So the core of how many participants is in the study is based on that power calculation. And then oftentimes people will put a little bit of extra effort into say, well, we maybe will add a few more people just in case somebody drops out, or we're interested in doing this additional test to see between these two smaller groups. And so sometimes there's more people than what you actually need, but at its basis, that's really the important deciding point about how many participants are in the study. Are some of the same clinical trials being administered in different groups as CDM or different age groups? And so I think what that question is getting at is maybe for a drug trial, how do you decide to go into adults first or to kids first? Or if you go into adults first, will it eventually go into kids? And so maybe Alyssa, do you want to start and I'll chime in?
Sure, absolutely. So for the Marina trial, we're starting our research in adults living with myotonic dystrophy type 1. It's important to recognize that when you're testing an investigational drug in a pediatric population, special care and attention is needed, and specific designs are needed in that clinical trial to go into a pediatric patient population. For myotonic dystrophy type 1, the root cause of the disease is the same for adults, juveniles, and pediatrics living with that condition. And so there could be a point in time when a drug that's being investigated in adults could also be investigated in a pediatric population as well.
And so typically, unless you have a specific reason, the Food and Drug Administration encourages people to start with adults because kids have additional protections, as they should. And so oftentimes that's why you see most of the studies will start with adults and then go to kids, although like I said, that's not always the case. Ms. Newman, there's a request to specifically say which medicine is actually helping your husband, and then without revealing the specifics of the studies that you're participating in, can you speak generally about whether or not every study you participate in actually helps your family, or if some do or don't, or what the balance there is?
Okay, so my husband takes modafinil, the generic Provigil, and so that really helps his wakefulness. My children rely on the Adderall because they need the ADHD help as well. So just the difference with that. But do you want me to say what studies they've been in or not?
I don't think you need to. No, I don't. Yeah.
So the studies that we have participated in are more about collecting data and understanding the disease. And so in that process, you're helping researchers and drug developers with their quest to understand the disease and find solutions. But it also helps me understand the disease better and for my kids to understand better. And so, and they're not like a huge, those studies are not hugely invasive in our life. You know, you're not going all that often. So we were happy to do that. And I think it's more for learning purposes. They were not about medicines.
Great. There's a couple comments that I'll just read out from the chat. So there's a plug for control. So that is true. So sometimes you really do need healthy volunteers or people without myotonic dystrophy. So people ask their family and friends if they would be willing to participate. And this person's acknowledging that their husband recently signed up as a control for a spinal tap study. There's another plug for the University of Rochester Stop DM2 study and to go to their booth. You're also welcome to go to the VCU booth if you want more information about that. And then, are the medicines currently targeting to stop progression or reverse sustained damage? Well, that is just an excellent question. I mean, I think the short answer is we don't know. The way that the current raft of therapies is being designed typically revolves around slowing progression because, again, you need to do that power calculation, and the assumptions you need to make are, number one, what is the actual disease progression? And number two, what's the minimum amount of benefit that you think that therapy would have? And that's typically how people try and design the studies. And so whether or not one of these drugs happens to be wildly successful, I'm hopeful, maybe that's true, but we simply won't know until we do those studies. Alyssa, any other comments there?
No, I think you addressed it nicely.
Okay, and look at that. We are out of questions and also out of time. I want to take an extra minute to thank Alyssa Peters with Avidity, Christy Newman, great story and the best pictures out of all of us for joining us, and then Jodie Howell at VCU for joining us. And hopefully you found some use and benefit from that. And I know that all of us are virtually around the conference, so feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. I'll turn it back to you, Tanya.
Thank you all. This was really, really helpful, helped connect a lot of dots for folks. And I want to just mention that Alyssa, Avidity will be in their booth right at 12 o'clock. So if folks have follow-up questions, as Nick mentioned, please go to the booth. But Harmony and AMO, who also have trials this current year, will be in their booths, as well as many of the other companies who are hoping to launch clinical trials over the next year to 2 years. So thank you all. Please feel comfortable visiting all of those exhibitors at 12 o'clock when they open up. And thank you to this esteemed panel for sharing your expertise and your experience with all of us. We are very grateful that you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.